Welcome back to the channel today. So we're going to talk a little bit more about victories at sea, and we're going to do a paint of one of the ships during this video. This video is going to take me several days to shoot. You're going to watch this in just a few minutes. I will speed through certain things in the painting, but I will explain everything that I'm doing as I go. So one reason why I like to do these videos, I have other painting videos on the page. Nothing yet for Victories at Seas. This is the first Victories at Seas painting video, but I always feel like a lot of people don't get into certain games because they're worried about their painting skill not being up to snuff with everybody else's. Well, I'm here to tell you I'm not the greatest painter in the world. I do what I can, but I don't have the steadiest of hands. I'm not the best painter, and you don't have to be either. Now, as I paint these, I am going to use more techniques than I think is necessary to make your models table ready, and I will explain as we go the minimum that you need to do to make your models table ready. It's probably just about, you're gonna have to prime it. So you're gonna have to clean it. You're gonna have to prime it. You want to paint your ship probably gray. You want to paint the sea blue, probably a white dry brush on the sea, and then a light gray dry brush on the ship, and then probably a wash. And it's probably going to be plenty to make your ships in Victory at Sea table ready. So while I'm talking, I am going to show you what I've done so far in terms of painting Victory at Sea. So what you're looking at here is my Imperial Japanese fleet. I have completely painted my two-player starter models. I've assembled and primed everything else, which is the Imperial Japanese starter and the Yamato. We will be what I've decided to paint during this video is one of the Mogami cruisers for a couple reasons. One, I've already done two Mogami cruisers, so I have an idea of exactly what I want to do, which should help speed the video along. I'm not going to have to be thinking about my process and making decisions as I go. So here's a picture of the Mogami cruiser that we will be doing along with one that has been painted. So we will be doing a very similar paint job to what we have here. Again, I did decide to do the decks with a light brown to tan color. Ships of the period had hardwood decks, and this is shown up that way. And I also paint the lifeboats. And then a couple other details. You can see the little X in the back here of the Mogami. I'm not exactly sure what that's for. Helicopter, plane storage, I don't know. I'm not actually even sure what they had available for them for helicopters during World War II, but that's all I can think that it's there for. I'm not a historian. But I decided to highlight that a little bit with some light gray along with everything else. I also do 3 layers on the sea. I do a dark blue, a light blue, and then a white. I think you can get away with doing a watered down dark blue and a white. I also do a wash on the water as well as a wash on the ship. I have a blue wash that I use, and then a null oil wash. We will talk about all of these things. You don't have to worry about it too much. The washes come pre-made. All the wash is a really watered down paint, and it kind of seeps into the crevices. So in order to give your model depth, it's a really simple product to use. Although I will go over how I use it because I don't use it just straight out of the bottle. As far as what we're going to do here, it's just going to be the one I will go through step by step. We'll paint the ship, we'll paint the water, start to get some details in on all of that until it gets to a point where it's table ready. I will explain the things that I don't think you need to do if all you want is the simplest possible solution. Um, it's sometimes just having any paint on a model before you play a game is you know progress for people. It's something that you can be happy about. You don't have to be the perfect painter. Um, as an example, I haven't decided what I'm going to how I'm going to go about painting the Zuikaku aircraft carrier. From what I've seen, it has a very elaborate um, paint job. I'm not sure that I'm going to go very historically accurate on that, or if I'm going to go with a more base theme or base paint job for it. I really have to think about that. I do like the looks of a very different model on the table that really stands out. So I may try and do something different for that one, but I doubt that it will be precisely historically accurate. I have decided to do my Imperial Japanese Navy first because I think that their paint schemes are a little bit simpler, and because I haven't decided exactly what I'm going to do for the United States Navy yet. The U.S. Navy used a lot of what they call dazzle camouflage. It's instead of the hull all being one color, the hull and the superstructure really all just being one color. Some ships, like the Missouri, like the Indianapolis, had multiple colors, usually grays and blues, and different shades of in between of those colors, usually 3 or 4 different colors, and painted like camouflage. This was supposed to help confuse your opponent in terms of the horizon. When they saw the ship, they wouldn't be able to tell, is that one ship or 2 ships or what exactly. Make it difficult to identify the ship. Um, in pre-radar, I don't know how effective it was, but that's what they did during the war. And I don't know if I'm going to go with the dazzle camouflage look or if I'm just going to go kind of a more traditional base, gray paint job for my US ships. I think I might try the dazzle camouflage on a couple ships like the Indianapolis and the Missouri. The destroyers, no. And some of the cruisers that I have multiple of, I don't know if I will do it on all of them. But the bigger the ship, the more close to historically accurate I might try and get, but it's not going to be super close. So I'm going to set up my paint table and we're going to get started. It'll take me a few minutes, but for you, you'll be back right away. Okay, welcome back. So we're going to get started on painting our Mogami class cruiser. This model I'm going to try and replicate as much as possible to the one that I've already painted. Again, like I said in the introduction, I am going to go a couple of steps beyond what I think is probably minimal. I think you could just go gray on the ship, blue on the water, white dry brush on the water, gray dry brush on the ship, and mostly be done. Probably a wash too. But we're going to go a couple of steps beyond that just because that's what I prefer to do. I always tell people, do what works for you. I got into this and I watch videos of people painting and I don't feel comfortable doing some of the things that they're doing. It's way too fine detail for me. So I take a little bit higher view. You have to remember that your opponent is going to be looking at your models from at least a few feet away. They're not going to be inspecting them really close up. So use that perspective that you're looking at a model from 2, 3, even 4 feet away. If it looks good then it'll look great on the table. So what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to paint the base of the ship a dark gray. I have several different brands of paint. I have just picked up some Warfront scale color. This is Winter Shadow SW62. This is by Scale 75. It's a new paint line that my store just got in, supposedly a little bit higher end line. Now, I always tell people when I paint, always water down your paints. You don't want to put on a thick, goopy coat of paint. You're much better doing a thinner, lighter coat of paint and having to do it twice than doing a thick, goopy layer of paint that you can't fix. Now, with that said, I also use Citadel paints and some Army Painter paints. I have noticed that I need to water down the Citadel paints quite a bit more than these paints. These paints aren't so bad out of the bottle. I will still add a little bit of water to this and mix it with my brush, and once the paint sits smoothly in my well, I'm happy with it. If it stands up at all, or you can see a pattern in the paint, then it needs a little bit more water, generally speaking. So I'm going to get started. I'm going to add my water, and then I will paint this. After I get going into painting this a little bit, I will fast forward the video through most of the painting of the gray. You don't need to see that at regular speed. So after I finish talking here, I will stop talking and you'll be able to watch me. And then when we get to the next step, which will be painting the blue of the base, I will tell you a little bit more about what I'm going to do there and do the same thing. So thank you again for watching. Hopefully you'll watch all the way to the end and you'll be inspired to do some painting of your own. If it's something that you're a little afraid of, don't be. Go right ahead and give it a try. Now I do like these bottles a little bit more than the Citadel bottles. The pots, as they call them. It's a little bit easier to get to control the paint coming out. Right. Now, I don't know if you can tell that, but that is sitting pretty proud in that well. It's not running to the edges, so I'm just going to add a couple of drops of water. Okay, I feel like that's probably pretty good. I do go over the whole model with the gray and then paint over the gray. That's just something that works easier for me. That way I don't have to worry about the details in the dark gray, and when I'm painting other things, I don't have to be super precise getting up to a line. So if I don't paint that, the white's not going to show through. It's going to be the dark gray, and it's going to mask a lot of mistakes that you might otherwise make. And again, always remember, your opponent's not going to be super critical of your paint, but they will notice if you have no paint. So I don't know anyone around here anyways who's going to be critical of a paint job. I'm always just happy when everyone has their things painted, because then it allows you to immerse in the game a little bit more. Alright, so now what we're going to do is we're going to do sea in blue. I'm using Calidor Sky from Citadel just because paint I already had works fine. I've done water and other fantasy miniatures with it and it works fine. Not going to buy a bunch of the same brand paints just to get something going. I have already watered down the paint. As I mentioned before, I find the Citadel you have to water down a fair bit more than other paints. But that's all set to go. We're going to get to painting. This is a fairly easy, quick one. There's not really much to say. We're just going to get all of it, and we're going to try and be careful around the hull. Okay, so our base has dried. I am going to do the deck now in a medium brown from Warfront. I'm going to try and keep the model in frame here. I know I lost it a little bit in the last one. This requires a little bit more fine control, oftentimes because you have the guns overhanging and other pieces sticking out. Sometimes you'll make a little bit of a mistake. What I probably won't film is I'm going to do the deck as accurately as I can in one go here, and then before I start filming the next section I will be going back and just touching up any of the gray that I may have overpainted with tan and didn't, or not tan, but the light brown, medium brown, that I didn't want to. Now the details get really fine in the center of the ship, between the bridge and the crane. I don't go too crazy trying to figure out what I should be getting to the deck. This is pretty simple. Some parts are easier than others. But again, I don't think it's not important to me to be precisely accurate on everything. Now, one interesting thing that I will mention is I have noticed, and I didn't notice this when I was putting them together or unboxing them, but each of these Mogamis have a very slightly different sculpt. There are very slight differences from one sculpt to the next, at least between a few of them. Maybe two of them are identical, but I can't tell. There are definitely some differences with some of them, which I find interesting. I think it must be a year difference, or something along those lines. But why don't we get going with the tan? I've already prepped my paint. I've already watered it down a little bit. I'll get going and we'll speed through this as quickly as possible. Okay, so now I'm going to probably do a couple of different steps all in this one sitting. I'm going to do a couple of different dry brushes. I'm going to use a light blue. I'm using this Lothern blue from Citadel. Now this is a step you could probably forego if you just want something really quick. Honestly, this model right now, you would be able to put that on the table and play it, and people would be very happy with um, what you've got. But we're going to do a couple of things to just bring out some more detail and um, soften some things up, smooth some things out. So when you're doing a dry brush, what you want to do is, we're not going to add water to the paint for this. You're going to load up your brush a little bit. You want to make sure it gets between all the bristles. But then before you put it to your model, you're going to wipe out as much of the paint as you can until you have a very small amount of paint still coming out of the brush. And then once you have that, then you can go to start brushing like this. Now we added a lot of nice texture to the water, and that texture is going to grab the paint in the high spots and start to bring out the waves of it. Now I'm going to do a white dry brush on top of this, so this is a medium step that I'm doing that, for most people may not be necessary, but I think the extra layer of color just gives a little bit more depth to the water. Again, not super critical here, but it is going to give you a little bit more texture and depth to your final model. Also, doing these dry brushes really brings a lot more consistency to the water. I don't know if that's the right word, but it will really smooth out the water. So we're getting closer to what we have with our finished model behind. So now I'm going to quickly just clean off this brush, and then we're going to do a light gray. So same thing, I'm going to be using this administratum gray. It's just a really light gray, and I'm going to do this to the whole ship. And you're going to notice I'm not going to be super careful to stay away from the deck. I actually want the raised points on the deck to pick up the paint. As well as the superstructure and other raised points. It's really going to highlight things. And again, we're going to work out most of the paint out of the brush. This took me a little getting used to doing the dry brushes. If you think you have enough paint out of the brush, you probably want to keep going a little bit longer, especially early on in doing this process. You don't want to have a dry brush and then it leaves a gob of paint on something, because then you're going to have to fix a lot of things. So this is going to give some texture to these guns. And again, there's a few raised points in the deck that I do want the gray to pick up on. For example, there are some guns here. If we can get the gray to come off with the dry brush, and we don't have to go back and paint those individual guns again. And then we want to make sure we get all the detail on the bridge. It's really going to bring out all of the texture of the model. There are a lot of details in here for such a small model. Now, one interesting thing that I will point out in going over this model, so I have 4 Mogami cruisers, because you get 2 in the 2-player starter and you get 2 in the IGN starter. And I was looking at, so the one we're painting right now, one difference with this one compared to the other 3, the other 3 all seem to have 4 lifeboats. This one seems to only have 2. It definitely doesn't have them in the same spots as the other ones. So again, this is a minor difference um, between each of the Mogamis, which probably goes to the refits. If you look at the date on the ship base, I'm sure they've tried to replicate whatever refits were done up to that point on the actual sculpt. The one thing I'm going to do, so if you look at this model, I did highlight the this little X pattern. So the dry brush is going to pick up on some of that, but it's not going to pick up quite as much as I want. So before we go, after I have the rest of this dry brush, so you may be able to see there are a bunch of little tiny details all around these guns. And by doing this dry brush, you're going to raise that texture just a little bit, make it a lot more visible while you're playing the game, which I like. Okay, and then I'm just going to get out one of my detail brushes. Just going to pick up a tiny bit of paint here. I need to get a little bit more of the light gray. I'm starting to run a little low. But then with the detail, I'm just going to try and get this X painted. And I would consider this to be a step that if you don't feel comfortable doing it, I don't think you need to. Just get a good dry brush over it, and it should be good to go. I just felt like this one detail needed a little bit more. You also have a problem with this one piece of detail in that this crane here is overlapping it, so it's really hard to get that hard, rough dry brush into this pattern, because if you go too hard with it or too aggressive, you're going to break off that crane, so you want to be careful with that. Alright, and I think while we're here, I think I am going to just paint those two lifeboats as well. Always shake your paints. Shake them good. Some of the paints do tend to separate, some more than others, so it's always good to give them a good shake. I need a very tiny bit of paint for this, and I probably just gave myself way more than I really needed. And I'm not going to add water to this, it's such a tiny bit of detail, and there's going to be a little bit of water in the brush anyways that will naturally thin out the paint a tiny bit. I'm just going to get a tiny bit right on the tip of the brush. So there's one on each side, and this is about as small a detail as I will ever do. So this other lifeboat is pretty much just opposite the other. Sorry if I'm getting my big head in the camera. It's just when I'm doing this detail stuff, I don't always film, so I often get these really close to my face. Alright, so there's our two. I might come up and just touch that one up just a little bit off camera. As long as a little bit of the hull there. Alright. Okay, for our next step, I'm going to do two things here. So, one, the last bit of regular paint, I'm just going to do the top of the stack and a ring right around the top in black. I just think it looks better that way. Makes it look more like a stack, a smokestack, or exhaust stack, whatever you want to call it. Again, this is very detailed. I'd have this right up to my face if I wasn't filming it. I definitely don't like to film every single model that I paint, but I will do examples from time to time. Reason being is it takes me significantly longer to paint a model when I'm filming it, as opposed to when I can just bang them out and not worry about placement. Okay, so there's that. Now, the other thing that we wanted to do is I cleaned this out. So I'm going to do a white dry brush on the water again, and we're going to do a little bit of a trick. So this is an easy way to get the nameplate and I guess the class plate more readable from a distance. We're just going to white dry brush over those, and because they're raised, they're going to pick up just enough of the white paint to make them much more visible, which hopefully you will pick up as I do this. Now I do always start with the waves just in case things are a little bit too much. So hopefully you can see that little bit of white getting picked up by the waves. Now as we go by here, I'm going to, so this is the Suzuya 1944, and just doing a little bit of a dry brush like that. Hopefully you can read that. It's not perfect, but it's all you need to do. You don't have to go crazy painstakingly trying to paint over those letters. Just that little couple of swipes with a dry brush will bring it out just enough. And again on this side we have our Mogami class cruiser text. Hopefully you can make that out, maybe. I don't know if you can make it out in the shot or not, but trust me, it is legible now from a distance for somebody not wearing glasses like I'm not right now. When I unbox these, that text is very hard to read, But that's all you need to do to make the text more legible. So there's the water pretty much done. And the ship. And again, you could put that on the table and be happy with it. I have one more step we're going to come back and do once this paint dries. We're going to put a wash or a shade on this, and I will tell you more about that when we do it. Occasionally people will go back and dry brush over the shade. I sometimes do, sometimes don't. Just depends how I'm feeling and how it looks after I do the shade. So we'll be back in a, well, for you, we'll be back instantly. Okay, so now for one of the last steps in getting this painted up is I am going to be using what they call it a shade or a wash. It's very watered down paint, but that being said, so I have these couple of Citadel ones. So I have a Nuln Oil. This is a black or very dark gray shade. This is the one when I'm modeling, this is like the default go-to shade. For most things I have used many bottles of this, but that's what we're going to be using on the ship. For the water, I am going to be using this Drakenhof Nightshade. It probably looks very dark in the camera, but it's a blue tinted shade or paint. So these are paints. Now, I say that they're very watered down. I'm going to further water this down. There still is quite a bit of pigment on these, and you don't want, if you do this, you get too heavy, you'll get big pools of very dark paint that will settle in and not give you quite the look that you want. So what I am going to do is I'm going to pour a little bit into my well, and then I'm going to at least add the same amount of water. So it's going to be a 50-50 mix between the shade and water. And I almost always pour out more than I need. I did once again. It's way more than I'm going to need, but that's okay. I need to get a little bottle for myself instead of using the straws for the water. But this does actually lets me control the amount of water I'm using. Pretty well, even though it does take some time. Couple more. This is something you really want watered down. What the shade does is you're going to get some on your brush, and the nice thing about it is you don't have to be terribly precise with it. What it's going to do, because it's watery, is it's going to sink down into the lower crevices and again add depth to the model. So it's going to look like it's going on fairly dark. The other nice thing is this, because it's so watery, it does not dry nearly as fast as the rest of the paints. So you can go back over it and you can move that paint around. If you end up with a little bit of a pool, you can go back and move that around pretty easily. And again, this is all just adding depth, in this case, to the water. So you can see I kind of pooled on quite a bit there, but we're just gonna You don't have to worry about it right away. You can just keep moving it around. Until where you like it. If you get way more than you want, you can just take like a piece of tissue paper and dab it up. That works as well. Now, if I put this on the sides of the model, it's not going to appear to be doing much, and it's not, because there aren't any crevices there for it to settle into. So I just did that for example purposes, I guess. So there's the water. The water's going to have to dry, but I am going to do the Nuln Oil right away after I just clean out my brush a little bit. This is a special shade brush, and it does actually work very well for shades. I tend not to buy very many brand name hobby brushes. I usually just go to a hobby store and get much cheaper brushes, because I tend to ruin my brushes. A little bit better control that time. Got a little bit less of the shade out, or the Nuln Oil in this case. The Nuln Oil is great for, especially for mechanical things like ships. They just darken things up, give it a little bit more of a weathered look. And this is going to sink into all those crevices on the bridge. Just give us a little bit more depth again to everything. It's all I love the shades. They really finish the model, and you almost can't screw it up. And you can screw anything up, but it's really hard to screw up the shades. Alright, so there's about a 50-50 mix of shade to water. And sometimes I will increase that even more than 50-50. Now you're going to see this is going to darken areas. And again, it doesn't make too much sense going along the side of the ship, except for a couple of places where you might have some gun ports and things like that, because the shade's just not going to cling to a flat surface very well. So you can see it's not changing the color terribly of what I've painted. But it's going to give things depth. It also masks a lot of very minor errors in painting. So if you're not a great painter like me, these shades mask a lot of very minor errors in your painting. So I very highly recommend doing a shade. There we go with the shade, and the ship's pretty much done. So in a moment for you, in a little bit, because this does take some time to dry, I am going to let that dry for probably a couple of hours, but I will come back for a quick wrap up of this painting video. Hopefully it was helpful to you. and we'll be right back. Well, here we are for the wrap up. So thank you very much again for watching. Hopefully that gives you a little bit of an idea of what I do anyways for painting. And it's not a significant effort really. And again, I went 3 or 4 steps beyond I think what the minimum would be. If you wanted to get these ships on the table, you could do it relatively quickly, probably with less than a day if you wanted to do it really quick. I would have to guess, in order to paint the single ship, probably took me a couple of hours, but the filming itself really complicates the matter a bit and just slows things down. I usually don't just paint one ship at a time. I usually do them in batches of 5, 6 at a time. So this, wasn't typical of what I do. It usually goes a little bit quicker than this. So I'm at this point, I'm going to finish my Japanese fleet, and then I will probably have a review of my entire Japanese fleet, which includes, I believe, everything that has been released for retail so far by Warlord Games, except for the Akagi aircraft carrier and the submarines and MTBs. Those are the 2 things that I don't have that are available for retail right now. So I will review up to that point, and then I will probably start on my US fleet. I do want to complete both fleets at some point. My problems with those things is, one, subs and MTBs will be the last thing that I learn in terms of playing the game, and that pack seems a little expensive for what you get, maybe, but I'm not going to criticize it too much until I get it and can do a box opening and review it. And then as far as the Akagi, I want the second carrier, but right now I have 1 carrier and 4 flights. I would have preferred Warlord released flights before they did multiple carriers, but that's just me. So once there are more flights to be had, I will then get the other carriers as well. So thank you very much. I do have quite a bit more Victory at Sea ready to go and to be filmed, so I'll be talking about it quite a bit here coming up. Thank you very much. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.